Ave viewers, today we talk about Spartacus Imperator, a game published by the French publisher Exasim. This is a two-player game that covers not only Spartacus' rebellion, but the three servile wars that shook the Roman Empire between the 2nd and the 1st century BC. Two-player game where one side will represent the Roman Empire and that a player will represent the slaves fighting for their freedom. I think this is pretty much all you need to know for now, so let's see how the game plays. The game is played on this mounted board. Always nice to have a mounted board, but I cannot say that I'm a big fan of this pattern here that is used to represent mountain areas, maybe because it reminds me of just, the pavement of a church, so it seems flat to me. It doesn't really give me the sense of a mountain at all. This side of the board represents Italy, and this side is used to play scenario number 1, the one involving Spartacus. Then you have another side of the same board which represents Sicily and part of Italy, and this side of the board is used for scenarios 2 and 3. Each scenario is played in a number of years, which is recorded on that track. Each year is divided in 4 seasons. Players will use leaders and they will place the counters indicating the leaders on the map. You do not place most of the military units on the map. The military units that are commanded by a leader go on a special display, which I will show you later. The units that you place on the map are the ones that do not have a leader, but leaders can absorb them into their armies as they move, and then these units will go on the display corresponding to that leader. Each leader also has a matching counter that goes on the action point track. Players will alternate taking actions, and usually an action costs an action point, so you will record the action point that you spent for each leader. However, there may be cases where a player will spend more than one action point in a turn, and that means that then later you may have a player going down to 0 action points with his leader or leaders before that the player does, and then the leaders that still have action points will just keep executing actions and spending action points until they also go down to 0. In each scenario, each player will have a display such as this one to keep track of the location of the units, which units go with which leader. Each leader has a box where you place the units that belong to that leader and that are ready for combat. Then there is a box for units that are still with that leader, but they have taken a hit. Now they are spent. They can travel with the leader, they can take another hit, but if that happens, they're eliminated. What they cannot do is to attack in combat. They can do that only after they have been readied and brought back to that box, and I'll explain later how you ready spent units. Then rebel leaders also have a box to keep track of the amount of plunder that they are carrying. Plunder is gained by the leader, by the rebel player, by ravaging Italian countryside, by eliminating units belonging to the Roman player. The Roman player also can gain plunder by stealing it from the rebels and by eliminating rebel units. Yeah, the Roman player cannot really ravage Italy, that wouldn't be nice. Also, the Roman player cannot save plunder. As you can see, in fact, the display for the Roman player looks like the one for the rebel, but each leader only has a box for the ready units, a box for the spent units, no plunder. The Roman leaders must spend the plunders that they gain immediately. They cannot save it, and plunder can be used in a variety of ways to gain a variety of benefits, and one way plunder then can be spent is to ready spent units, but there are also many other ways in which you can use plunder. For one action point, a leader can move to an adjacent area, terrain doesn't matter, and if the leader moves to an area that also contains an enemy leader, then combat will follow, but I will explain that later. For an action point, a player can play a stratagem card. In each scenario, the players will be given a different hand of stratagem cards. These are tailored to the scenarios, and those, of course, will generate different types of benefits, some very good, some a little more situational. For an action point, a rebel leader can add a ravage marker to the area where it is in, and when a leader ravages an area, then you roll on a table and that leader may gain 1 or 2 points of plunder, which are added to the pool of that leader. Ravaged areas cannot be ravaged again, but a rebel leader can move and then later ravage another area. And ravaging areas is particularly important because each scenario has a sudden death victory condition based on the number and type of areas that contain a ravage marker. If the rebel player manages to ravage the right amount and combination of areas on the map, then he wins the game immediately. However, this is made a little more challenging by the fact that during each spring term, the rebel player will have to roll a die for each ravage marker, and if a 4, 5, or 6 is rolled, then that ravage marker is removed from the map. For one action point, a rebel leader who is not in a ravaged area can recruit a new unit from this pool. The unit is drawn randomly and then added to the display of the leader. The Roman player does not recruit this way. The Roman player receives reinforcements based on a schedule which is described on the scenario card, but the Roman player can still spend action points to make spent units ready for combat again. Regular combat is resolved using this display here. There's also another type of combat, which is siege combat. It works differently, and I do not have time to talk about that one. During regular combat, you will place your leaders there. A leader may also have a tactical rating. That means a number of dice that leader can reroll, and you will use these counters to keep track of that, of the rerolls that are still available. All units that are ready to combat will go to the second line. Units that are spent will go to the Victis area. At the beginning of combat, each player will also select a tactical card. Each player has an identical hand of 4 tactical cards to choose. They indicate different things that may be performed during melee. Also during combat you reveal the rebel units, because most of the time the rebel units will be face down to create a little bit of fog of war. There's also a variant in which you can play with the Roman units face down, but you reveal units during combat. In a battle, first you will have a round of ranged combat and then you have 2 rounds of melee. At the beginning, all units that have a range factor, that is a number of arrows in that green circle there, will fire. You roll 1d6 for each such unit, and if you roll equal to or less than the unit's range combat factor, then you inflict a hit on the opponent. All dice are rolled simultaneously, all hits are applied immediately. The owning player decides how to assign losses, and a unit that is fresh and that receives a hit will be moved to the Victis area. A unit that is ready in the Victis area that receives a hit goes to the Elysii Campi. That means that that unit is eliminated. After you resolve range combat, then you will reveal the tactical cards. Usually the tactical cards will indicate the type of melee unit that moves to the first line. In this case, the rebel player has chosen the blue melee units to move to the first line, and the Roman player the yellow melee units. Then you execute 2 rounds of melee combat, during which you simply roll for each unit that has a melee factor and that is able to fight, and if you roll equal to or less than the melee factor, then you score a hit, and you repeat that twice. There are 2 rounds of melee which are just identical. However, units that are in the first line will be able to score critical hits. That means that if you roll not less than but equal to the combat factor of the unit, then you can score 2 hits. In this case, a legion will be able to score 2 hits if it rolls a 3, or it will score 1 hit if it rolls a 1 or 2. However, there is a catch, because units in the first line also have to take the first 2 hits that are inflicted on their side during each round of melee. Each time that a unit takes a hit, you record that on the casualty track. At the end of the second round of melee, you compare the total of losses that the two sides have taken, and the side that has received most losses is the loser. Usually will have to retreat. In some rare cases, the loser will have all of his army destroyed, but I haven't seen that happening very often. There are ways in which you can prevent that from happening. The game comes with 3 scenarios and 3 scenario cards that will give you detailed explanations of what happens in each scenario. They will tell you the schedule in which the Roman leaders are sacked and replaced and your reinforcements come in. The victory conditions will change in different parts of the scenario. You will be able to use certain cards or execute certain actions only in certain parts of the scenario as instructed by the scenario card. There's just a lot that the scenario card tells you to do or allows you to do or limits you from doing. On one hand, this is a strength, I think, because the game is very story-centric precisely because of this. It creates very strong narratives. On the other hand, it is hard to escape the feeling that the game is a little scripted, precisely because just there's so many things that you have to take into account. A comparison that comes to mind to me is with No Retreat. There too you have a very intense schedule of events or things that the game brings into the gameplay, but at the same time you have a larger map, so there are many places where you can do things, many units, many cards that you can use in a million ways. So I really had the sense that in No Retreat there is history that is happening outside of the board, and you can cope with that in a variety of ways. In this game, the map is not very large. You do not have many areas. You do not have many cards, and the cards are affected by the scenario card. The units have to work in armies, so actually they move in large entities, but not many of them on the map. All this really gives me the sense that here the schedule of events on the scenario card really is more relevant. It does restrict your freedom more. And I'm just afraid that it will limit replay value in the future pretty soon. On the other hand, the game, for what it is, as I played it, is pretty enjoyable. I played all 3 scenarios. I enjoyed them all in different ways because they're very different from one another. They go from, mainly small skirmishes to large battles and epic sieges. The countryside, is ravaged. You have this impression, really, of destruction that is spreading everywhere. It really has a strong narrative feel. I like the battles, I like combat. It's brutal, unforgiving, and very often luck has a huge role in it. Nevertheless, I still find it rewarding. I still find that it's fun to choose what units are exposing to danger, and if you're trying a dangerous maneuver, then may pay off, but may put in the condition of losing all of your army. I like how you choose the units that are spent now, which ones you save for later. I think that there really are a lot of things that you can do in that combat, not necessarily to mitigate the luck factor, but to make your experience with it more interesting. In conclusion, I find this to be a very enjoyable game. I really enjoyed it. It is just that because of the scripted nature of gameplay, I don't see myself playing it very often in the future.